Good morning and welcome to the FutureHOW talk. Thank you so much for joining me as I share the second book called FutureHOW, Reimagining Our Collective Future in this keynote and presentation. I am really excited to be sharing this sort of thinking because I feel that it's incredibly important right now for us to be thinking about new paradigms and new ways to go about telling ourselves stories about the reality we live in. I'm just going to wait for a bit until everybody starts arriving. I'm starting to see people arrive. I'm speaking to 3 different cameras. So I've got Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram happening. I'm still not that technologically advanced to have one camera doing all of them, but I'm sure I'll have a whole bunch of different suggestions after this, after I've said that. The topic or the payoff line for this book is very indicative of what I'm going to be talking about today. Reimagination, the rethinking of the stories that we have been told about the world that we live in. And the more I dive deep into the subject, the more I realized how incredibly complex economics is. And so I'll give it just another minute before people start arriving, before I start diving into it. And I've been working feverishly trying to get as much information into my head, discussing it with as many different people as possible, trying to get as much sort of depth of understanding of where we are and what this world that we are living in is telling us, and what parts of it are we believing, and what parts of it do we have the power of changing. And so let's get stuck in. Welcome. Wonderful for you to join me. Thank you for your time. And today's talk is called FutureHOW. This book was prompted, I've already had a suggestion. Thank you, Olaf, but that's fine. Let me just finish with this keynote before you start giving me suggestions. I knew it'd start. Either way. This book was prompted because I kept receiving the same questions from my existing clients and new clients asking me, what's next? What does the future look like? And what does post-COVID-19 actually feel like? And I don't think there's anything really wrong with this question, but I think the fundamental paradigm it comes from needs to be shifted. You see, firstly, I think the question lacks empathy for what's going on around us, and also a lack of empathy for ourselves, because if you think of the world we come from, we were on the brink of exhaustion. And not just us, the whole ecosystem was on the brink of exhaustion. And so what we're doing without even realizing is, please take us back there. Please take us back to the place we were exhausted, because this is unfamiliar, and what we want is familiarity. And that's the second point, is that I realize that the people that are asking these questions about going back to where we come from aren't after the exhaustion. Obviously, what they're after is familiarity. And even if familiarity is abusive, we seek it out, which is the weirdest human nature thing that we have. And so if you think about it, many times we find ourselves in adult relationships, whether they're marriages or partnerships or boyfriends and girlfriends, they seem similar to our parents' relationship. And what we see is that we don't seek love, we seek familiarity. And so in this process, or in the same way, people are desperate to go back to familiarity, even though familiarity wasn't that great for everybody, even for ourselves. And I was really successful in what I was doing, but I was exhausted most of the time because I was part and parcel of the machine that prioritized growth over everything else. So instead of running and building more scenarios and running more strategy sessions for companies to get back onto the boat of familiarity, I wanted to try and explain and try and dive into another option. And so I felt compelled to begin writing a new story. Amidst all the chaos and destruction, I was trying to figure out, how do I come about building a new positive concept and a new story amongst everything that's going on around us? And the more I dived into it, and the deeper I dived into it, I started to realize the real conundrum we are all stuck in. I saw that what we have developed around us are these layers and layers and layers of stories. But ultimately, at the end of the barrel sits the economics of economies. The wealth and money that drives our society and our behaviors really sits at the bottom of this sort of pit and story that we've told them. And so I started researching and writing the book, and the more I dug into it, the more I realized how complex it was. And I finished writing the book, and I woke up one morning in an absolute panic because I realized that what I'm trying to explain is economics. And the more I dived into it, I realized how little I know about economics. And so I kind of like wrote about it, I researched it, and I thought, what am I going to do when I start getting questioned about economics from economists when I don't have the answers because I'm not an economist. And so I went for a run. I mean, I'm staying on a farm. If you've been following what I'm doing, I was running in the forest just up here, and I had the most incredible aha moments. I have access to one of the brightest minds I know and one of the most respected economists globally. He has advised presidents, finance ministers, and in fact, he was part of the team in South Africa that wrote the Constitution of South Africa in the economic section. And we all know that the Constitution in South Africa is one of the best constitutions around the world. So I reached out to a family friend and a friend of mine and a mentor of mine, Dr. Iraj Abedian. And I said to him and explained to him the vision that I had and what I was trying to write about. And I asked him whether he would take a read of my book. And I said to him, look, if you want to jump in, I'd love to have your input because, again, I'm talking about subjects that I'm not really apt in. And he said, cool. He said, send it to me. So I sent it to him and he came back to me immediately and he said, fantastic. He says one or two things are totally wrong, which was great. But he also said to me that he shares my quest and he shares my narrative that I want to build that is for the upliftment of all of humanity, the planet, and the animals. And so besides being an incredible economist that I've now got part of the book writing process, I've now got somebody who shares my vision for this new world. And so together, what we have decided to do was write 2 more books in this series. Right now, this is FutureHOW, and next will be Future Next. And all we want to do, and this is very key, is we want to be able to open up new conversations, develop new perspectives and philosophies that we all can join together so that we can all develop this communication process that has everybody adding value and adding a voice. So if you were looking for answers for what's coming post-COVID-19, I'm not going to give them to you. And I don't think anybody can give them to you. And you should stop asking for them. You should start thinking about what fairy tale were we living before this and what do we need to do to develop something new post this. So the book is broken down into 4 sections. And if you have downloaded the book, great. If you haven't, you can go down to my website. It's johnsanei.com/books, and they're free to download because I think it's important to try and get this message as far and wide as possible right now so that we got more and more people anchoring into the new way of thinking rather than where we were and panicking, wanting familiarity and exhaustion and to go back to that and see that. And Iraj is WhatsApping me right now. He's obviously not watching this. That's cool, but that's great. So let's first begin with this concept of forgetting the story we come from. And obviously dealing with the emotional stuff is paramount. And I wrote about this quite extensively in FutureNow. But once we've said goodbye to the world we've come from and we've made peace with that, what we can now do is give ourselves this golden opportunity to become objective and to become real. And to really start to dig deep, to ask new questions about the new paradigm that we want to create. And when have we ever had this opportunity before? I mean, in this incredible unpredictability around us. Think about it. Oil price was below zero just a few days ago. I mean, I'm not into that sort of stuff, but I saw that. And then I had a bunch of people telling me, no, it's crude oil, Brent oil, this. Who cares? It's below zero in some places. I've never seen that. My family lives in Singapore. I've got some family who lives in Singapore, and they said to me, no, Singapore is all cool. There's no problems here in Singapore. And then all of a sudden they shut down to the 1st of June. So we find ourselves in such an unpredictable time. And so we've got this opportunity to ask a new question. And so instead of asking, let's go back, let's ask a new question of where we can go. And please bear in mind that our reality that we come from, and I just want to keep reminding you of this, was one of speed and profit over everything else, exhausting us and taking us away from our families, from health, and from many other things, because we were all part and parcel of this machine that was called the economic system, or known as the neoliberal economic system. And even in knowing that this was the case, some of us still yearn to want to go back there, which is really, it's if you think about it for a second, and if you really ask yourself that question, it's because we don't have another option. And now that we're starting to see that many small to medium-sized businesses don't even know that there'll be a business to go back to. I mean, I've got a Tasha's, I'm a partner in Tasha's in Canal Walk in Century City. We don't even know if we'll open again because we don't have the cash flow to go about building that business up again and going back into paying salary. I mean, all those sort of things. We don't even think we'll go back. And Tasha's is a successful brand. And then if you think about some sort of industries, they've totally melted away. I mean, look at fashion or hospitality. There's so much deep uncertainty here that what we need to start doing is not asking to go back to where we came from, but start to build deep resilience and agility within ourselves so we can deal with this and whatever challenges are going to be coming past this. Because trust me, we haven't even touched on AI and blockchain and all these technologies that are going to be still with us post-COVID-19, that are going to be taking a lot more jobs away as we understand them right now. So before trying to jump in and change the course of human history, we need to try and figure out what it could look like in the first place. And so this is, again, a conversation point for what it could look like. Not that we have the answers, but what it could look like. And I don't want to take anything away from the world we come from. Please, I'm a huge fan of the world we came from because ultimately we had technology, and look, we're communicating right now on technology. We had medical miracles, people living way past the sort of 48-year expectancy life 100 years ago. And we had sort of lifting of billions of people out of poverty. But if you dig a bit deeper, there were still many, many women and children around the world that were not universally respected. And ultimately, we weren't actually respecting the earth either. So yes, there were so many pros, but there were also many, many cons. So this guidebook is about the possibilities. And will it have critics? Yes, it absolutely will have critics. And that's very much part and parcel of what we wanted, because we want diverse perspectives, because through the merging of diverse perspectives, what we have is the truth that comes out of it. And so we're not, and I just want to make sure we all understand, we are not asking to go back to communism, or not back, actually just go to communism or go to socialism. But we need a new ism, an ism that takes the best from communism, from socialism, and from capitalism, and something that is giving us a holistic way to make the world better for everyone. And we intentionally use the word everyone because we feel that everyone should benefit. And so the critics out there, remember that every time you hear something new, initially, it's unthinkable. You don't even think about it. And so that's why this book is about the imagination of a new collective, because often we don't even think about it because we're so busy running from pillar to post. We don't have time to ask new questions. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. Once it's unthinkable, then it becomes radical. People that think like that are just radical. I'm not going to even accept that. And then it becomes, oh, well, they might have a point, acceptable. And then it becomes sensible. And then it becomes popular. And finally, it falls into policy. So we have, again, a pause, an unprecedented opportunity, and I would even go further and say a responsibility to reimagine ourselves in a new economic, socio-economic reality. And this is what we need to do. Dive deep into our psyches, dive deep into our stories that we've been telling ourselves, and build new narratives and new norms. And remember, that storytelling has always been an essential part of the success of our species. It allows us to transfer stories from generation to generation. The stories we tell ourselves, listen to, and believe have an incredibly profound impact on our perspective. Whether it was a fairy tale that we held on to or a moment that we keep recounting over and over to ourselves, we remember these stories. But the problem is that they take on a life of their own, these stories. And they move from whisper to wisdom, from fantasy to folklore, and then they move to the most dangerous place. That's always how we've done it. People don't want to talk about things because that's just how we've always done it. And we've now stuck around with outdated stories that have just stayed with us because generations above us told us that that's just the way it is. And now we live in such a sophisticated society, but many of us catch stories that are ancient and from ages ago. And so I've spoken about this in my second book, Magnetize, how these narratives and these stories allowed slavery to continue. They allowed apartheid to continue. They allowed women not to be able to vote. They allowed children to stay in labor camps. And so all of these were stories that were outdated and eventually finally got kicked out of the sort of reality that we live in. And so what we have to do is confront and become objective and critical about the stories, about these whispers that became wisdom. And remember, we can become really clear about being reasonable and totally objective about these stories if we take the time to reflect onto them. And so we don't have to keep justifying the stories that we believe just because they've been handed down generation to generation. And so often what we do is we carry on telling these stories without actually ever asking and stopping and saying, are these really true or not? Do they actually even count in the world that we live in right now? And if you think about it, a practical solution or a practical way to explain this is if you're driving on the highway, right? And you're driving and you're cruising and somebody zooms past you. You think to yourself, that person's crazy. How can they go that fast? And then all of a sudden you start wanting to overtake somebody because they're going slower than you. And then you start complaining that this person going slower than you, they're so slow. What's wrong with them? And the only speed that's right is your speed. Nobody else's speed. Everybody, that's fast, that's crazy. That's slower, nah, too slow. And that's exactly what we do with our reality, is where we are right now. Perfect. Anything before, nah, it's ancient. Anything going forward, nah, that's too radical. We don't want to actually go there. And so what we do is we hang around people that think exactly like we do, and then we keep creating the same stories. And what this does, it causes hostility, and it causes division, and at times war. Some practical examples, like in Germany, there's parks that are very comfortable with people being naked. In fact, you have to be naked to be in those parks. And other parts of the world, it's really polite to burp after your meal so that the chef knows that you've really enjoyed that meal. Try doing that in different places. You could go to jail or just be seen as a brute. So our instinctive judgments limit us in how much we're willing to learn, to stop, and to really think about how more lateral can we be in our thinking if we just stop to look at our judgments and the stories that we're telling ourselves. And this pandemic is just the best time for us to do this. Let's explore these narratives, private and public ones, micro and macro ones, and to get to this place where we can stretch and get comfortable with new stories. So new stories. And let's now move into the concept, because I think it's important for us to realize that if we aren't able to acknowledge that we are living within a story, we can't actually think about getting around the table and talking about new options. So these new stories always start with a new question. And there's a great quote that says, when nothing is certain, anything is possible. And we can now really confirm that nothing is certain. And when nothing is certain, great things come out of it. I mean, World War II brought about the United Nations. The Spanish flu brought about women getting the opportunity to go into leadership roles and into the workplace in a much better and more robust way. Moments of collective crisis force us to think big, consider every possibility, reevaluate the failings of the past, and become more fluid and exciting with new opportunities and possibilities. And the key is to ask questions in a very clear format. Instead of asking, why are we here? We need to ask ourselves, how do we change it? And that's the simplest thing, because how says, I want to know how I'm going to change it. Y says, why has it always been like this? And so the top leaders in the world have done this. I mean, Sheikh Mohammed al-Rashid Al Maktoum from Dubai asked, how do we make Dubai a city of the future? Elon Musk said, how do we make the earth cleaner for everybody? Nelson Mandela said, how do we bring about more sort of equality for humanity? And so what we do is we force ourselves to think about how, when we get ourselves to ask the question like that. So instead of saying, why am I being forced to stay at home? We should be asking, how do I use this time better so I can redesign my business, my approach, my skills, the new society or sort of societal economic system that can benefit everybody? And it's our collective responsibility to ask as many hows as we can, because if we do it collectively, we all become creators rather than all of us sitting in a why is it like this? And it's too big for us to even wanting to change. So let's really get to grips with the story, because great storytellers are alchemists of the mind. Everything from The Great Expectations to Breaking Bad, they introduce us to complex characters and plots and twists. And our society is exactly the same. It's full of storytellers. And these storytellers have done this exact same thing. They've created characters that have shown up in unexpected places and created economic stories that we've all bought into. But I can promise you this, that our storyline is getting stale. It's just tired, because what happens after you've gotten the next bonus and opened the next business and gone through all of these sort of things? It's just boring, because then what else are we going to do to uplift as many people as possible rather than being the sort of selfish machines or animals that we've been created to be because of the economic system? And so the best storytellers don't only augment our views, they reach into our hearts, inspire us to change our characters and reimagine possibilities. I mean, who could be better than Martin Luther King with his example of storytelling? I mean, years and decades later, we love him for what he did and how he stood up to that racist regime that was in the States. I mean, it still is, but parts of it. But he did such an incredible thing, because ultimately as human beings, we are wired to be inspired. And in order for us to develop a new story, we need to align our hearts and our minds. And I've spoken about this in FutureNow as well. Dr. Joe Dispenza speaks about this. And many ancient wisdoms speak about the alignment of heart and mind, giving us this opportunity to have coherence in the way we make decisions about the future. So let's build a new story. But as I started writing this new story, I started to realize how layered it was, how many different layers I needed to go through. Because right now, the IMF has now announced that we are about to go into a depression, like it was in the 1930s. We are losing over 150 million jobs right now going through this. It's not only the fragile countries that are having a tough time, the first world countries are having a huge tough time because of this, because the financial system is integrated. And so what's happening is when somebody sneezes, everybody gets a flu. We've heard that quote. And the depression that's now causing this great trigger of fear across the globe. So it's this panic that we need to become clear on and ask new questions about, because this panic is being brought about by money and wealth, because that sits at the heart of our society. And our society has done incredible things for many years, but if we dig a bit deeper, we'll start to see that there are such major cracks, because Bill Maher had Nancy Pelosi on his show the other day, and he kept asking her, where did the trillions of dollars come from that you're bailing America out with when you already owed $20 trillion to we don't know who, but you still had another $2-3 trillion to come out? And she kept avoiding the question. And I like Nancy Pelosi. She's straight up, but she couldn't answer the question. And so we realized that really every country is in debt, and we don't even know who they are in debt to. And so the economic system is a house of cards. It's not something that's built on anything stability. And so we become totally bored of it. Because, I was looking at the stats. In just 3 decades, the wealthiest elite in America have become $21 trillion richer. And the bottom 50% have become $900 billion poorer. And trapped in the middle are the middle class that over the last 30 years have not really had a huge bump in their income in relation to inflation. And so everybody is floundering, trying to survive, except the 1% who just keep getting richer. And so we start to see this widening gap affecting most cities around the world. Look what happened in Hong Kong, in Santiago, in Paris, and in South Africa. And so many places are becoming, there's unrest. And the last time we saw this happen in a major way was the French Revolution, where the pitchforks started coming. And I mean, think about it. Do you think the pitchforks won't come? Because eventually people are going to be sick and tired of this. And I want to read a quote from Professor Galloway, or Prof G. If you don't know him, follow him. He's got some incredible insights. He says this: I worry our government has been co-opted by the wealthy and is focused on protecting the previous generation of winners, even if it means reducing future generations' ability to win. Aren't we borrowing against our children's prosperity to protect the wealth of the top 10, if not 1%? And that's the thing, is that we've just kept buying into the same story over and over and over, but we need to start asking bigger questions. And over time, neuroscientists, anthropologists, and psychologists have written volumes about our amazing, complex internal world, while economists, sociologists, and scientists have written volumes about the complexity of the outside world. But how our policies around finances are measured, the governance, haven't changed for hundreds of years. And they're still the same. Profitability, efficiency, production, humans and machines, keep pushing. That's just hundreds of years old. And the way governments spend money, I mean, the amount of money that's been spent on military instead of schooling and health just shows us that the way we are being measured, the way we are protecting ourselves, is just an ancient, ridiculous notion. And then we have the heroes that we all look up to. People like Apple, Samsung, and Amazon. The best examples are people that have been dodging taxes. Money that could have been going to social welfare, social upliftment, has been totally dodged. And I am using Apple products right now, so I'm part and parcel of the issue. And then we have Panama Papers that revealed that there were thousands of rich people hiding their money, taking away what should have gone back to society. But you talk about these things, and all of a sudden, you're labeled as a dangerous and misguided socialist. And so there's three myths that Iraj and I wanted to introduce you to. And remember that what we'll do is in FutureNext, the next book, we'll unpack these myths and the solutions. But I just want to say this, and I'll say this again in FutureNext. The complexity of this is so deep, so layered, that we have to be able to utilize the construct of consultation, where we have people of power and people of less power all sitting around a table discussing the way we need to be able to do this. So here are the three myths that Iraj and I decided to share. Now, if you don't know Iraj, you'll know that Iraj has got an incredible mind. You ask him anything about economics and history, he'll be with you for 3 hours explaining the depth and layering. And in fact, yesterday I spoke to him for an hour and we're talking about the next book. And just the way he started explaining economics, I mean, you must understand, he's written volumes and we've just chosen 3 of them to share with you. So these are the simplest ones that we wanted to get across right now. Number 1, the myth that regulations kills the economy. There's a story that regulations constricts and kills capitalism as its heart. But the absurdity of Amazon and the Panama Papers shows us that billions of dollars that could have been used for social good have disappeared. And there needs to be new regulations and rules around competition and wages, because it's important to be able to fine-tune these regulations with the complexity of where we are right now, so that we have the best solution for everybody, not just the people sitting right on top. And all markets need to operate with global and local regulations. And if we don't do this or end up with another Wuhan wet market scenario, because what they did in their local, without having those local rules there to govern it, we've all gotten the opportunity to get sick or the danger of getting sick. So the first thing, and this sort of myth is regulation kills economy. No, we need better regulations, more modern regulations, regulations that are both global and local and hyper-local, that are fair for everybody. The second myth is value equates to price. And so modern economics says that value equals to price. An example of this is if you take a CEO that earns $25 million a year, and the employees that work for him earn an average of $25,000 a year. Does that mean the CEO gives 1,000 times more value than the people working on the floor? Impossible. It really is impossible for two reasons. Because people don't earn what they're worth. They earn what they have the power to negotiate. And the factory worker brings more tangible value than the CEO, but the CEO signs the checks and sits in a protected remuneration framework that the system has engineered. So he has the power to dictate what he earns. And COVID-19 has shown us that the frontline workers, the nurses, those sort of people, the people on the front lines are not being remunerated what they should be and according to their value. And so I saw this thing on Twitter yesterday that said, I'm a billionaire, I'm living in my penthouse in New York, and I step out of my window and I clap for 2 minutes, and that's what I give the frontline workers while they're still not being paid what they're supposed to be being paid. And the second thing is that the CEO that earns 1,000 times more than his employees cannot eat 1,000 more meals every time he sits down. And he cannot wear 1,000 times more pants than every time he sits and wears clothes. And so there's less money moving around in the system when he's earning so much and everybody else is earning so little. Because if the middle class had more of that money, they could spend more of that money, meaning that more restaurants could be out there. They could buy 1,000 pair of pants, meaning that we could have more economies moving based on the middle class spending it. And the more people are earning, the more people in the middle class are having money, the less pressure there is on the subsidies and support structures below. Because all the oxygen has been sucked out the system, that these people, now we need subsidy programs and food programs and these sort of things. And we need to realize that the more people that are in the tax pool, the less the individual has to pay. And we know this in South Africa. A very small percentage of people pay tax, and that puts a huge burden on the whole system. And so in summary, the more people earn, the more they can spend, and the virtuous cycle of economics even grows further. Third myth, Neoliberal Economics says that at the very heart, the gospel of the neoliberal economic system sits a term, Homo economicus. And the term means economic man, which means a rational person who pursues wealth for his own self-interest. And this is the assumption at the very heart of our economic system, that all humans are like this. And businesses pursue profits relentlessly with no consideration for other factors. We chase cash, celebrate it, and hardly ever chase self-actualization or true happiness. And the story we've been told is that progress, prosperity, satisfaction, and social development are all measured by our ability to accumulate material things. I mean, can you think about that? And don't get me wrong. I don't say we can't consume anything, because that's just ridiculous. What we need to do is elevate the rest of our complex identity. We are just celebrating one aspect. And so we are not selfish, actually. We are actually very reciprocal. As human beings, we want to help other human beings. The soldier who jumps on a grenade to protect the rest of the soldiers, is he doing that because he wants credit for it? What about the thousands of Mother Teresas out there helping the world, trying to alleviate hunger and look after orphans? What about Doctors Without Borders? I mean, there's hundreds of people out there that are not this selfish, rational human being. And so every time we act with the best interests of others in mind, we prove this theory wrong. And so these three myths that sit at the base of our economic system, things that we've bought into, need to be challenged because they're not true. They might have been true, but I doubt that actually. But we haven't been able to give them the opportunity to challenge. Why? Because that's how it's always been done. That's what universities teach us. Those are the economic systems that have been drummed into us. I mean, think about medicine. If you think about how medicine has been drummed into us, is symptom, medication, symptom, operation, symptom, medication. That's all that happens there. Now, obviously, the medical fraternity is important in many aspects, but often we don't bring into the concept of what emotional state were you in that caused that sickness. No, that's not what a doctor does. It's not being educated in how the doctor sees it. So here are 5 suggestions, and 5 suggestions that Iraj and I want to express and expand on in the next books. So the new tomorrow is a consultation, a conversation starter, because of this new 5 concepts that we want to expand. The first one, we need collaboration, not competition. Successful economies are not jungles, they're gardens. We need to tend to them. We need to bring modern regulations that are fair and just. And if we don't, guess what? We'll have another 2008 crisis again. We'll have more climate issues again. Because why? We haven't created new, fair, and sustainable metrics around the new type of capitalism. 2, we're in this together. Inclusion, not exclusion. Inclusion creates economic growth, not only for when the super wealthy have already had their fill, but right from the start. The regulations should promote reciprocity, not selfishness. They should promote collaboration, not competition. And so what we need to do is realize that there's more than enough for everybody. We can now collaborate to grow on top of each other, not keep following the Homo economicus sort of society or premise. 3, and we've started seeing this, and I was actually speaking about this in my keynotes before COVID-19 happened, is that we need to start serving society and not shareholders. We need to move away from shareholder focus to stakeholder focus. And Jamie Dimon, the CEO and chairman of Chase Bank, had got about 180 CEOs from around the world to start looking at rewriting the rules. We should be prioritizing employees, communities, shareholders, and consumers. Because if we had done that, we would never be reliant on the sort of machine that China has become. Because what China does, it makes cheapest. And what we need to be doing is be creating fairest, not cheapest. And if we had prioritized employees and communities, we would have created a more fair system. So this concept of measuring success, not by giving shareholders those returns, but actually measuring it through stakeholder, becomes the 3rd term. And the 4th one is greed is not good. Being rapacious or being aggressively greedy doesn't make you a capitalist. It makes you a sociopath. And the economy that we are in right now needs cooperation at scale, not sociopaths, because that's not bad for business. That's bad for business and for the society. So when we celebrate these sociopathic business people out there, what are we doing? Even when we look at them and go, wow, you're amazing, all they've done is hoard money and have not been able to cooperate at scale. And so I think we need to start celebrating different types of heroes. And ultimately, and finally, is we need to choose a new system. Unlike the laws of physics, economics is a choice. Neoliberal economics has sold itself as an immutable, unchangeable, almost natural law, when it's in fact just societal norms and narratives constructed into pseudoscience. If we really want a more equitable, prosperous, sustainable economy that supports a calm, civil, and high-functioning democracy, we need to choose it. We need to collectively reimagine it. We need to collectively go about thinking about what this new system looks like and create the dialogue required for this. Thank you for watching. This has been top of heart and top of mind for me. We're going to be expanding on this quite extensively, and I've already started working on Future Next. These books are available for free download from my website, johnsonei.com/books. Please go ahead, download them, share them as widely as possible. We need to anchor this type of thinking into the future memory of as many people as possible, so the questions we ask change in a dramatic fashion, so that the paradigm we move into post-COVID-19 is a renaissance that celebrates everyone. Ciao.